Yo, back from my annual video and we've got a new update. It's big, it's fun, it's PvP based, and yes, it's Bounty Hunter, and today we are going to talk about the potential problem that Jagex and honestly myself probably didn't see coming. Now I want to preface this, I don't think Bounty Hunter is bad, it's actually doing really well on its release, and I'm seeing people who I never thought would dip their toes into PvP actually enjoy it. So in my book, this is looking really good for them. Even a lot of the problems that came up on release were patched pretty much instantly or within 24 hours, which is really good from Jagex's end, and I like it. There are some problems like the reward shop being overpriced, some server lag, and the exit being overcrowded. But those are things that people already know, and quite frankly, I imagine most of them are getting patched soon. So what I want to talk about today might not be an issue for some of you, but from listening to people in clans, friends, and smaller communities, I've heard this complaint enough that I figured I'd ask about your opinions to see if we can start a discussion. The problem we're talking about today is the Karasi in main bracket PKing. So if you're a Karasi fan and you're writing out how it's a skill issue or mad 'cause bad, hold on, give me 10 minutes to make my case and you can tell me what you guys think at the end. I read all the comments, so I'd be happy to see what kind of ratio players think this is good, fine, or bad. I just want to start the discussion. So what's the big deal? Karasi was in the main game pre-Eoc, it isn't anywhere near as broken for other styles of PKing, and it really only affects one combat bracket, being max mains. First, I think the combat bracket matters because most new players get into PKing through Edge, and that means all your new guys are the guys who have to face this problem. Most fresh PKers don't really have a quested Pure or Zerk to play on, so they all come through the main bracket first. I think the problem with Karasi at its core is it's promoting less engagement for a very strong meta. What I mean by this is that using the Karasi is the best bang for your buck, without promoting any more risk or skill, and it encourages a way to fight that's just not very desirable. So let's break it down. Why does the Karasi promote less risk? Well, before the Karasi, if you wanted a good spec and a strong main hand, you needed whip risk, and that was when both whips and GP were more expensive. If I wanted momentum during the fight, but still needed a strong spec weapon like claws or AGS, I had to take a whip, and at that point, I might as well get barrows too. If you didn't want to risk, your choice was either momentum or big KO potential. But because the Voidwaker is basically as strong as a whip and has a spec weapon that's pretty much the same as claws, you get both in one, and you don't have to risk a main hand, and you can say fuck the barrows. So I can step out here with 500k risk but have the momentum of a whip, the spec of claws, and none of your defense matters when I do spec. So I can still kill anyone even if they way outgear me. Why should I risk more? Obviously, the better PKers or the people trying to have fun won't care. We'll take more risk because why not? But for the standard player, you don't actually have that much of a reason to take better gear. It'll give you slightly better odds, sure, but your risk is going to triple, and a lot of people just don't want to take those odds. Again, nothing wrong to the players, it's just an outcome of Karasi main hand being as strong as a whip in old school RuneScape. This main hand buff is also a problem since it reduces the skill. Having a main hand means you have to one tick if you don't want to give away your spec, but if your spec is your main hand, well obviously you just click the spec bar whenever you want. And believe me, I'm not saying one ticking is hard. It was pretty much the standard even like 6 years ago. But forcing yourself to react to it under time pressure is a lot harder. And that is something that would normally differentiate a lot of the new Edge PKers compared to like kind of new Edge PKers. I'm not here to gatekeep, but inherently, if you take a whip in a Karasi and I just main hand it, if I hit your Venge one tick before you attack, you're going to have to react fast to spec me. I can just click a button. Why are you going to risk that extra whip against me when I have it easier than you? It's inherently easier for me, even though we have pretty much the same KO potential, and that makes your opponent want to risk less too. Now let's use it in a more skilled environment. Let's say I'm trying to Invisivenge spec you on my pid. As soon as I see your whip animation, instead of clicking the Venge, the weapon, the spec, and then you all in the same tick, I can pre-click my Karasi spec, and then whenever I see you whip, just click Venge and click you. That is so much easier to react to. So why would any average PKer want to take a whip and risk more when you can just main hand the Karasi, risk less, and have it easier? This is all to say that main-handing the Karasi is very strong for how cheap and undemanding its usage is, and that brings us to how it promotes an undesirable meta. Some of you old PKers might recognize this, but who remembers these guys? For those who don't, pre-EOC there used to be a ton of one-item declaw rushers just walking around Edgeville. A lot of them would claw you out hoping you weren't paying attention, but some of them would just claw scratch you. They're all in D-hide or naked, risking like 50k tops unless they're in a high-risk world, but all they would do is claw scratch you down until you were like 70 HP, and then they double spec you and run. And these guys were annoying as fuck. You try to smite them, you don't usually smite them. They risk little to nothing, take a brain-dead approach to killing you, fail 6 out of 7 times, and waste your time. But the one time you do die, you're actually pissed off.
What the fuck? Are you serious?
Now, this might be starting to sound a little familiar. Main hand their spec web, whack you a little bit until you're low HP, dump both specs, can't kill you anymore, so they run to the bank and get more spec. You kill them, you get pretty much nothing these days. Die to them because they max both specs, and suddenly you feel like trash. Voidwaker whacking is pretty much the same as the old claw scratch one-itemers. The only difference is now their whack actually hits a lot, so instead of dying once every 10 times, you might die a lot more now. And they also risk like 500k, but account for inflation and how much 50k was back then compared to 500k now, it's pretty much the same thing. So what makes this meta undesirable? It's not really the risk, because risking 500k isn't that bad if you're also risking 500k. Part of it is the perceived lack of skill. Sitting there and clawing you the first time you fall under 70 HP is obviously pretty brain dead. And nobody likes dying to someone that they think isn't skilled. A bigger part of it is that the Karasi doesn't have KO potential outside of spec. People nowadays don't have the same honor that they did before. Safing, spec-tabbing, it feels like people just say fuck it, who cares? If having 2 Karasi specs gives me really good odds to kill you, and having none gives me nothing by comparison, fuck it, I'll dump my specs and leave. And obviously, I'm not saying give the Karasi AGS properties as well. I'm just saying that spec-tabbing is another thing that comes with this overwhelming Karasi meta, and it's relatively undesirable. I've seen a lot of people complaining about just getting spec-tabbed, and it sounds like one of the main gripes for max mains in BH right now. The other thing is the Karasi spec is just naturally very strong for edge PKing, and having half the community rely on it can feed into the other aspects that we've already talked about. Even when Karasi was 60% spec, people pre-EOC called it a prod spec despite being objectively the worst spec between AGS and claws. And that's because it always hit. It does not matter how good your gear is. You could be wearing Torva or Justiciar, I'm gonna punch through it with my spec, which means if I actually know how to stack you out on top of that, my odds of killing you just skyrocket. Spec-tabbing you from full is now more prevalent, because fuck it, it's not that hard to spec 260s with Karasi. If I tried to do that in claws, I'm not clawing through Darok, Bandos, or Torva most of the time. If I just want to Hail Mary Karasi Gmaul spec you from 85, that's easier too. In decent gear, like 1 of every 3 Karasi specs hits at 55 or higher. Then I have to hit my Gmaul. If I take an AGS, I have like a 30% chance to just flat out miss, and another 30% chance to hit 55 or higher, and then I have to hit my Gmaul too. Randomly stacking you out at 80 HP is just a lot more viable when my spec always hits a good number on you. With main hand, I'm constantly reminded that you can just spec at any time. At least if you had a whip out, I might know that you could one-tick me at any time, but my brain isn't constantly staring at the possibility of it. If I have a whip out, you probably don't feel the need to eat on 70 HP. If I'm just AGS camping though, you're constantly being reminded that I can just click this spec bar at any time I want, and if I actually hit it, you're gonna feel like an idiot. This means we just eat higher now. I mean, back in the day, if you tried to spec us on 70, we'd just let you, because it's like a 1 in 15 chance.
Yes, is he? Oh my, what? Eat? Oh my god, what the fuck, he just actually went for the spec.
Are you really gonna waste your spec on that? But I mean, now people are just obsessed with counting chances, no matter how small. So as far as I'm aware, mains in Bounty Hunter just aren't afraid to go full green bar, even when they're in Daroks. But in this environment, with you staring down someone's Void Waker the entire fight, it's like no wonder you eat to 90. Because with this whole chance mindset, and with half the people main-handing a Void Waker, never knowing when they're going to randomly go for a spec, and they probably safed against you too, you can't really blame any one person for it. But having the Void Waker be that good, and just having everyone main-handed the whole time, it encourages players to just eat to 90. If you're not risking that much, your gear is shit, you're probably not that good at eating, so I could just Karasi Gmaul Spec-tab you 3 times, and one of those times, you're gonna die if you're not sitting high enough. If you're risking more than that, my Karasi's still gonna hit anyway, and you're gonna want to eat higher because you have more to lose. 6 months down the line, we've got everyone eating to 95, and even if I same tick stack you with like armor off Venge, same tick spec off bid, I still have to hit a 65 or else you just don't die. I think making everyone eat to 90 makes fights boring and just drags things out. I think people will always be able to farm kills, but I do think eating to 90 every fight is super lame, and it's naturally just going to make killing people more dependent on just getting good specs. Safing's encouraged because Karasi is so strong regardless of what gear you're wearing. This makes fights take longer and adds a bigger luck component to the fight. With Karasi, your only KO potential is your spec, and if we're all eating to 85 or higher, you giving me an easy to recharge spec pool at the bank is gonna promote a meta where players are just looking to dump their specs and then leave. Why are they gonna stay if you eat to 90 when all he can do is Karasi whack you? But why are you gonna sit any lower if you don't know if he has a light bearer? He's main-handing his spec wep the whole time, maybe he's got spec back already, and you don't know because he's been wearing it the whole fight. It's hard for either player to want to compromise, but if nobody does it, then we just have everyone eating to 90 and then dumping specs and then insta-leaving. And I think most people don't want that, but that's just my take. Times change, so as someone who's logged in twice this month, you should take my perspective with a grain of salt. But I'm very curious to see what you guys think on this topic. Most of my observations are from friends, streams, clans, videos, etc., so maybe your experience is a bit different, or maybe you don't think these aspects are actually that bad. Maybe you guys like spec-tabbing, because even if you're not fighting as long, you might see more kills or deaths since the fights are super condensed. Sitting 90 plus every time can be good because you're not really going to die to a random noob AGSing 77 anymore. Even if he specs that, he's still going to need to roll a 1 in 5 Gmaul on top of you if he wants to kill you now. Do you like the Void Waker being an all-in-one weapon? It might lower the skill gap, but that can make it easier for new edge PKers to get into PvP and grab some easy kills. I don't know. These are just the concerns I've seen and heard over the first week of Bounty Hunter for max mains. It's still a good update, and I'm happy to see edge PKing coming back, because that's pretty much how everyone got into PKing in the first place. I just wanted to start the discussion, so I'll see you guys in a bit and have a good one.